Hi guys, Buildzoid here, and today we're going to be taking a look at the R9 270X Hawk from MSI. And this is a card, just the PCB, of course, not the cooling system. But this is a card that I always really, well, not always, but I did want a lot. So I'm hugely thankful to the fan of the channel who actually sent this card in. So yeah, big thanks to him for sending the card. Because the reason why I want one of these is basically there's two 270Xs that have like pretty special PCBs, and one of them is the Hawk here, and the other one is the Toxic. So I still need to get my hands on a Toxic 270X, but the Hawk is off of the sort of, well, it's no longer like missing from my collection. So why would I want this card in my collection of GPUs? Well, the Hawk series from MSI is basically mid-range lightnings. So you get an insane VRM, you get a bunch of sort of, well, you get some extra extreme overclocking features. I think they also get support for Afterburner Extreme. Though I don't actually really care about that with this card because I can kind of do everything. Like, this is an AMD GPU, and more importantly, this is an AMD GPU with, I'm not 100% sure, but this is an international rectifier controller that's actually like IR branded, so I should be able to control it with the USB 005, and we do have the connector for that right there, so I just need to add that. I've not gotten around to doing that yet. But yeah, basically, you know, it's an extreme overclocking card, so you get, you know, it's a mid-range extreme overclocking card. So that's why I'm super excited about actually owning one of these, because these are pretty, well, you know, like, you're not going to get a 270X with a better PCB. And the other thing is just like the 270X is, well, basically the like early, well, basically, any 28 nanometer AMD GPU, in my opinion, is far more fun than most recent releases in terms of overclocking. The only exceptions to that would be like the Fiji cards, which are kind of, they're weird to overclock. So they're like my least favorite of the 28 nanometer series. And then the exception to that in the other direction is Polaris is actually really fun to overclock, and then everything else is strange. All the newer cards just weird, obnoxious piles of garbage as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, 270Xs are really cool because they're a smaller, like, this die is sort of like, it's one of the smaller dies that AMD made on 28 nanometer, and the thing about the smaller dies is they clock really, really high. So 270Xs, even on like air cooling, water cooling, you can easily do 1300 to 1450 megahertz on some of like the really, really good chips. And so, yeah, like, you can do some insane clock speeds without actually going very far, like without having to go too far in terms of cooling on these. So that's always fun to mess with. What else is there? Well, they're cheap, right? So they're not as bad if you blow them up. They support BIOS modding like everything else, like 7970s. It's basically like a 7970 with more clock speed, which is like, what's not to like, right? Though admittedly, most 270Xs will come with inferior memory. So where like HD 7970s, you're basically looking at like, well, no, some of them do come in LPDA, but most of them you're looking at Hynix. Most 270Xs are straight up LPDA because these shipped with much lower memory clocks out of the box, and they're not sort of high-end cards. So I'm not yet, like, I don't think I have a Hynix 270X yet. This one might, you know, this says LPDA right there. So yeah, this isn't a Hynix card either, which does mean that we're kind of limited on the memory clock speed, which is unfortunate because you can like, if you can push the memory clock up on the old 28 nanometer GPUs for like 3D Mark Firestrike, it blows up your combined score. Like, it's insane. Like, you can be down like 50 or like you can be down a significant amount of core clock, and as long as you have a silly amount of like, if you have enough memory speed to back it up, you're often gonna do really well in the combined test against cards with much higher core clocks. So yeah, it's a bit of a interesting sort of architecture in that sense, where it's just like, yeah, more memory speed is great on these. And unfortunately, but this is an LPDA card, so really the only thing you can do is like mod the memory timings. But, you know, to that extent, we do have a dual BIOS switch up here, so BIOS modding is very, very like easy and safe to do, because obviously on cards without the BIOS switch, like, you can still, like, it's not that hard to fix a bad BIOS flash. It's just that with a switch, it's far easier. So yeah, because you basically flick the switch to boot up on the backup BIOS, then you get into Windows, you flick the switch again, flash the bad BIOS, done, right? Like that's all there is to it. So yeah, this is a pretty cool card because like, well, the BIOS switch is actually standard for everything above a 7870 actually. So this is actually a like significant feature. I don't think 7870s came with BIOS switches. It's kind of hard for me to remember because with AMD, it's like I know the high end always has BIOS switches until like the 5700 XT. But with the mid range, that I don't think 7870s came with BIOS switches default. So yeah, that's a pretty cool addition in my opinion. Other than that, we also have voltage checkpoints right here. So VMEM, VGPU, VDDCI. I'm not actually going to use these because I obviously want to hook up the oscilloscope right to the back of the core. So not gonna make much use of these, and I actually want to start getting scope shots for memory memory power delivery as well. That's one thing I'm just wondering about. Is it's like, well, I can measure all the things, right? Like why stop at measuring the core? Measure everything. Measure the memory controller. Measure the memory. So anyway, let's get into the VRMs because yeah, so card has some pretty cool overclocking features, but where it really shines is just like the VRM on this thing is absolutely insane. So this right here is, of course, the Vcore, and it is for a 270X. This is huge. A reference 270X comes with a 5-phase, which is actually like really good. That's like better than what you'd get for most like, well, for until like GTX 680s shipped with 4-phase VRM stock. So, you know, a 7870 actually has a better reference PCB than the NVIDIA's 600 series flagship. So, and the 270Xs do too because it's the same damn chip. Anyway, so that's our Vcore here. And the Vcore here is just like the crazy thing is this Vcore. So the reference card is already pretty damn good because it's like 5-phase, and I think it's 50 amp power stages on that. But this takes it like way up there because this is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-phase. It's a real 8-phase. That's all 8 phases are completely independent. There's an 8-phase controller. There's 8 sets of drivers spread across 4 chips. So if we go on the back of the card, right, the controller's this right here, which that's an IR 3563B. And I don't think I've ever seen this chip on any other AMD GPU. So it's like that already is like, that is special. This probably is like a predecessor to the 3567B. Actually, no, that doesn't make sense. No, because smaller number. It's probably a predecessor. Still, the thing is, it's an 8-phase, so that's really cool, and it has all of the, you know, high-end fully digital international rectifier controller features. So up to 2 megahertz. Is it up to 2? I didn't put that in my notes. But up to way more switching frequency than you'd actually want to run on the VRM, which even if it was just 1.2 megahertz, that's more than you want to run. So yeah, we have this really cool controller. Which is like the reference cards would come with a CHL 8225, which like that's a true 5-phase. So you can't really do a not true 5-phase. So, you know, that's kind of that. But so the CHL 82258, the downside with the CHL 82258 is actually you need a CHL dongle for that one. Even though CHL was owned by International Rectifier at the time that these cards were made, it's just like, yeah, it doesn't work with the International Rectifier dongle. So that kind of sucks. But this should work with the USB 005, which means I should be able to get some like serious voltage control on the, and like load line control, voltage, like VRM switching frequency control. I can potentially mess with also, like, I think it has the adaptive transient algorithms. Which you can mess with those as well, which that's like deep end stuff. Like, you know, I'm not sure I actually want to play like those are settings where it's like I'm not even particularly certain like how to best use those. But yeah, like basically, you know, and MSI makes it very easy to just take full control of the VRM here, because they do also just give us the connector for the I2C interface of that pin. I mean, of that chip. So I'm a big fan of that. And the fact that that's an IR controller. Still have to, though, I'm 99% certain that it'll be compatible. Like the 3567B works, so I don't see why the 3563B wouldn't. Anyway, for the drivers, we're looking at these, which are IR3598s. And these are dual drivers or drivers with doubling built in. But here, these are running in just straight dual driver mode. So you basically get two PWM lines from the, well, yeah, they'll probably come across like something like that. Two PWM lines to the chip, and then that comes out to like with drive lines for 2 phases, something like that. Actually, that's wrong because the MOSFETs are, well, no, high side should be around here somewhere, and low side should be in this area. So you get the idea. Basically, this is a real 8-phase, which is insane for a 270X, because like you don't get real 8-phase VR like for GPUs of that generation. I don't think there's actually any other card with a true 8-phase. Because on the 290Xs, you're stuck with the IR3567B, which only works in like the only configurations I can think of for that controller are like 6+2 and 6+1. That's I think the highest configuration that's ever been used from that for that chip. But yeah, here we're looking at just a straight 8-phase, which is freaking awesome, right? Like you're not getting that on a freaking 290X, no matter how much you spend. Now, admittedly, you can get 290Xs with like 10-phase VRMs and 10-phase VRMs and 12-phase VRMs. That's admittedly using doublers, but the thing is, it's just like, well, I like, you know, the concern there being is just like, well, doublers add delay to your PWM signal, but I don't think you'd have that much of a delay if the doublers, because yeah, most of the 290Xs that use doublers use 3598s anyway, so the doublers built directly into the drivers. So I would assume that there's basically no delay in that scenario. Though the downside is you're obviously using discrete MOSFETs, and discrete MOSFETs generally tend to be slower than power stages in general. So that's kind of like, you know, there's just trade-offs to the design. So in terms of transient response, it's just like, it's complicated. Right, like I actually have a video planned where it's, well, actually you might be watching this after that video comes out, but basically I have had there's a video that I want to do which will be like talk about why transient response is so damn complicated. It's not going to talk about like how do you fix it or anything. It's just going to be like, this is why it's difficult. So anyway, yeah, but you know, the control scheme here is just awesome. Like you're really like, this blows away reference PC. Well, actually, no, we need to get to the MOSFETs. So, but control scheme, right? Like it doesn't really get much better than an 8-phase. You're not really going to see anything better than that. Now, at least not in this generation of GPUs, right? Like currently there's the IR35217. No, not 217. There's the, well, nobody uses the XDP, no, that's the Infineon, yeah, the XDP132G5C. You don't see that thing used on any GPUs right now, so, but theoretically, it can work on GPUs. Like, it's supposed to support the GPU voltage regulator standards, so we might see a GPU with a real 16-phase at some point. But back in the day, 8 phases was the hard limit. Like, you just couldn't go above that. So anyway, for the high side here, we're looking at an IRF 6, no, MSI doesn't like the 6 series for whatever reason, 8327. And for the low side, we're looking at an IRF 8308. So these are both direct FETs from International Rectifier. So that's why you see the metal casing. So the metal casing is basically to improve heat dissipation, right? Most MOSFETs look like this. Like this is like a normal MOSFET package, but these come in the metal casing because it basically improves heat dissipation properties. It also makes them more expensive, but yeah, the end result, they should be a bit easier to cool. And the other thing is, like, these are very... some idiot didn't put in my notes what the low side RDS on is, so I'm going to have to go dig through. And that idiot would, of course, be me, because nobody else works at AHOC. It's just me. But, let's see, 8308. Oh, yeah, it's insane. So, so the 8308, that's a 1.9 milliohm RDS on MOSFET. So that's low. That's very low, right? And of course you have 8 phases of that. Like, it's not so low, like, and that's at 10 volts. So at 10 volts. Now, admittedly, that's not as low as what you'd get on like a reference 290X, which that used a 6894, which a 6894 at 10 volts is a 0.9 milliohm RDS on MOSFET, which is insane. Like anything below 1 milliohm is just like, those are extremely rare. You don't really see those used as discrete MOSFETs. It's just like normally you're going to be hovering a little over 1 milliohm. So these are like, this is really high end for a discrete MOSFET low side like this. So the end result is that with with 8 phases worth of 1.9 milliohm RDS on low side MOSFETs and these high sides, this VRM gets absolutely insane efficiencies. Like it is so overkill for a 270X. It's unbelievable. So here goes, right? Which idiot forgot to... It's probably 1.2 volts. It's probably 1.2 volts, 300 kilohertz switching frequency. That's the nice thing about if you just do all of your ratings at the same values, is it's just like you don't have to worry about forgetting your like not putting it in your notes. But seriously, who wrote my notes? Right? Like what happened? I have no idea why that's missing from them. Anyway, so 1.2 volts, 300 kilohertz, and 10 volts gate to source. I'm assuming it's 10 volts. It might be a bit lower because MSI does have these linear regulators sitting right behind the VRM. They aren't all well, I'm not sure what every single one of them is for, actually. I really don't know why there's 3. So, yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with that because I don't think, well, maybe they have like, what? No, because that... like something like that, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, I'm really not sure why there's 3 of them. Maybe they have different... They could have like a different drive voltage for the... Does the 3598 even support that? CHL8510s supported that, but no, the 39... Nah, it would just be an extra pin. So yeah, it probably supports that. So you could have like a different voltage for the high side and a different voltage for the low side, but it's difficult to really optimize the VRM efficiency. But that's like, that makes the calculations difficult. So we'll just go with everything was at 10 volts, which it definitely could be. It could also be everything at 12 volts because the 3598 straight up supports 12 volts drive, and it's not like the MOSFETs would. Like there's some downsides to running your MOSFETs at like using a higher drive voltage for your MOSFETs, but the biggest benefit is you get your full low RDS on of your low side MOSFET. There are downsides like you have more gate charge losses and that kind of thing, but most cards will... Well, no, it really varies. But most of the time you'll either see 5 volts or you'll see 12 volts. Like you don't really see anything else in between most of the time, though. I think Lightning cards, well, there are exceptions to that. For example, Sapphire has cards with 6 volts on their power stages instead of 5 volts, right? Which is just like, yeah. So those exist. And I guess the Lightning, like these are definitely for drive voltage. But anyway, for convenience sake, we're just going to go with it's 10. Because you're probably not going to get, well, the efficiency could only get better if you actually like fine-tune the drive voltages exactly for how much current the VRM is outputting, right? So that's, I guess, the main reason why they have 3 different linear regulators sitting in this area. So, and one of them is probably providing like 5 volts for something somewhere, because obviously you don't get 5 volts from the PCIe slot, and I don't know, maybe this runs off of 5 volts. I didn't bother to check, right? So, anyway, at this point, with all hope in me lost, let's talk about the VRM efficiency. So, 100 amps output. This is going to produce about 9 watts of heat, which is insane efficiency. And that's even like, so usually it used to be that in the past when I would do discrete MOSFET VRM ratings, I would not account for like driver side losses. So I'd only account for like the loss due to the resistance and switching of the current through the MOSFETs. That was the only losses I'd account for. For this card, I changed that because otherwise this would be even lower otherwise if I was using the old rating method. Basically, I added gate charge losses, so it's basically the energy used up turning the MOSFET on and off. Because that's a energy loss that, well, fixes the efficiency. Like, that's why you get an efficiency curve, right? Because otherwise, you just see the heat output of the MOSFET increase entirely, like, from 0 due to the current. And at 0 current, you'd have 0 heat output. But that's not true, because switching the MOSFET on and off produces heat output. So causes some heat output. So in reality, your heat output always looks like that, where it's never 0. And in some cases, you can end up with curves that look like this, where it actually gets worse if you're at really, really low currents due to, like, some power stages run into that issue. And I haven't really bothered to look into why that effect happens, but yeah. But basically, it's impossible for a MOSFET being switched on and off to, produce 0 watts of heat. So now my calculations account for that a bit better. It's still not all of the losses, but it's more of the losses, so that this is more comparable against, like, power stages. Anyway, 9 watts of heat output at 100 amps, like, massive overkill. Just absolutely stupid levels of overkill here in this VRM. 150 amps output, like, especially, like, keep in mind, this is a card that has 150, like, a sub 150 watt stock power consumption. Like, this VRM isn't even breaking a sweat when this thing runs stock, right? Like, it's freaking awesome. Anyway, 150 amps output, you're going to be looking at about 16 watts of heat. So now we're still, like, this is still a really high efficiency figure. Like, this VRM is just absolutely nuts. 16 watts of heat output at 150 amps. 200 amps output, you're going to be looking at about 25 watts. Like, it's a Hawk, right? It's built to the same standards of a Lightning, except at a lower budget. So, if this was like a Lightning card, this actually isn't that different from some of the Lightning VRMs. Like, the one VRM that MSI ran was they basically do this VRM, but they double up on the low side to get even less conduction losses in the VRM. So yeah, this isn't, like, so far off what you'd have on a GTX 680 Lightning in terms of the VRM. Now, obviously, they didn't bother to put 2 low sides in parallel for this VRM because that is just, like, this is already insane for a 270X. Like, it is way overkill, right? 8 phases, huge amounts of current handling capability. Like, I love this card. Absolutely love this card. Anyway, 250 amps output, it would start producing about 37 watts of heat. So finally, like, at this point, the VRM is starting to actually produce some actual heat. But it is worth noting that, like, at normal loads, like, the thing is, the card for the VRM cooling system on this card is actually just like a metal plate. There's no fin stack or anything on it. And it makes sense that works fine because, well, it doesn't make any heat. And if you're on air cooling, like, you're never going to see more than 150 amps on air cooling, right? Because if you literally double the power consumption of the GPU core, which, again, this card at stock pulls around, say, 130 watts, right? So, and some 30 watts of that is probably going into the memory system. Actually, no, less than 30. It's going to be the 384-bit memory controller for GDDR5 from AMD for this generation was around 35. So this would probably be about, they have like 20 watts going into the memory controller, right? Into the memory system here. So that's all this stuff, as well as the VRMs for that. Now, the Vcore, so the Vcore output at stock would be like 110 watts, right? Or more like the input power of the VRM would be 110 watts. So there's some VRM losses in that. So we could say, maybe 105 watts going into the core. If you divide that by 1.2 volts, you get significantly less than 100 amps at stock, okay? So if you were to double the power consumption of the core, you'd be looking at maybe like 1.4 volts, which would translate into maybe around 140 amps, right? Because that's the thing is, like, if you increase your, like, assuming the same operating temperature of the chip, if you increase your voltage by 40%, you get a 40% increase in power, in current draw, which means that, 1.4 times 1.4 is 1.96. So you double the power consumption of the GPU core, and you're still not above 150 amps, right? Like, stupid overkill here. And yeah, on LN2, you might be able to push the core to maybe the 1.6 range. And it's like, but the thing about LN2 is, like, the really low operating temperatures actually reduce the current draw because you have less leakage. So yeah, it's just like this VRM is just like you could chop off two, like, if this VRM, like, if the VRM had 2 phases fail, it still wouldn't be an issue. Like, you could just keep running it. The main concern would be that if the controller realizes that, 2 of the phases are no longer there, because that might cause some regulation irregularities on the output. But other than that, it's just like, yeah, this has way too much VRM, which is, like, I love this card. Absolutely love it. So 300 amps output, which is just like, this is purely academic. Like, when does this VRM actually start getting hot? Oh, around 300 amps. at which point it would produce about 51 watts of heat. So this would not be out of place on a, like, this would be kind of viable for a 290X, because a 290X at stock would be in this range. Actually, yeah, no, a little bit below that range. So yeah, this VRM would not look out of place on a 290X. It would be, honestly, a very good VRM for a 7970. Like, this... Like, I love this card. Like, I really wish we still had cards like this, because these days in the mid-range, but the thing is, it's kind of like the different, like, back in the day, the reason cards like this existed is because overclocking had, well, this card is kind of from the end of the overclocking, like, insanity, I'd say, from the vendors, because, you know, the Hawk series, the Lightning series, like, those all, like, especially, like, the Lightnings are still kept around, but I consider them Lightnings in name only, not really, like, Lightnings, like, real Lightnings, like you had for, say, the 980 Ti. Like, the 980 Ti Lightning already didn't really have that a great run, but, like, the 780 Lightning, 7970 Lightning, 290X Lightning, those were real Lightning cards, right? And this was from the same era as the 290X Lightning, so this is a real Hawk card, right? And the Hawk line got completely scrapped because... instead of overclocking being the big focus for hardware vendors, it suddenly became just like smash gaming on anything. Just put the gaming name on anything and it'll sell, right? Who cares about, you know, building? Because the other thing is like this was a really expensive 270X, right? Like for a 270X, like this was like a VRM like this isn't free. Like that controller isn't free. All those linear regulators being added, not free. The fact that all of these, like these are all Nichicon FP5K capacitors, right? So these are FP, so yeah, those are Nichicon FP5K capacitors. Like those aren't free. They're not very cheap, right? We have all of these extra, like the output filter of this VRM is significantly more substantial than what you'd get on a reference card. That costs extra money. You go on the back of the card, like the controller is more expensive. That's a freaking 8-phase, right? Like actually, I think the A variant of this controller shows up on some top-end extreme overclocking motherboards. You know, we have. Like, I'm not sure how much these add to the cost because MSI is actually replacing a bunch of multi-layer ceramics, but it's interesting that, you know, they decided, yeah, 2 SMD aluminum polymers right there, right, for the Vcore VRM on the back of the core. So, like, this is a really just, like, this was not a cheap 270X, and it's just, like, you know, if you released, like, I don't know, a 2070 Super Hawk, like, I think that would be a really cool card. But would it actually sell, right? Like, that's the main issue. Like, how many would you sell? If you can't sell enough of them, then what's the point? So, yeah, and the Hawk line kind of died. But while it existed, it had some really awesome cards. There was also some Hawks which weren't quite so awesome. But this is definitely, like, you know, I think this is technically... I'm pretty sure this might actually be, like, the very last of the Hawks. Because I don't think there was a 900 series Hawk card. So, yeah, and for the last card in the series, I mean, this is a good way to go in my opinion, right? Better than the Lightnings where it's like, oh, it's barely a Lightning anymore. It still has the name, but it's barely a Lightning. So at least they never like drag down the Hawks like they've done with some of the other cards, or how the Matrix series has now become. Matrix cards used to be like really cool extreme overclocking cards. Now it's just a Strix with an AIO attached to it, and it's just like, well, yeah, you know, I'd rather if they just never resurrected the name in that case, right? Like, just don't make Matrixes if you can't do real Matrixes. Matrix being the extreme overclocking series from Asus. But anyway, the minor rails, right? What about the minor rails? So this right here, the notes do say, wait, that's VMEM? Oh, okay. Well, I guess that makes sense. So this is our memory VRM. I thought that was VDDCI, but anyway. At least my notes do mention what's VMEM. So, and that highlight is terrible. No, that there is VMEM. Controlled by this chip. This is a 2-phase. So again, like a huge, like literally 100% more phases than reference. Right, because the reference card was a single-phase memory VRM, because it's 2 gigs of GDDR5. You don't need a lot of memory power, right? For something like this. Actually, even the 290X with its 4 gigs of GDDR5 and its 512-bit memory controller gets away with a single phase memory VRM. But here, you know, this is a Hawk card. Getting away with is not enough. We need massive, stupid overkill. So two-phase memory power. Though, admittedly, MSI, this isn't... It's not quite on the insanity level of the Vcore, because these MOSFETs I'm not a fan of. But the controller is a UP 1610P. And some idiot didn't put anything in my notes about it other than that it is a two-phase. So, well, it's a two-phase. I guess that's kind of the most important thing, because the thing is, LPDA memory doesn't even seem to scale with voltage, or at least not on the 270Xs. It might be another weird thing like the 7870. Like, I still need to mess with this card more, basically, is what I'm getting at. So, now we got two-phase memory controller, but the MOSFETs, Nyko Semiconductor. If you need cheap, this is what you get. So we have it's high-low. Yes, it's normally high-low. So our low side here is a PK 632BA. It's not a very good MOSFET. I think it's like 6 milliohms RDS on. For some reason, my notes don't seem to include too much information about it. The thing is, the memory VRM, like, even if this is, like, not a great MOSFET, it's a freaking two-phase for memory power. Like, it's not an issue, is basically what I'm getting at. Like, this VRM does, like, it's memory power. You don't need an insane set of MOSFETs to power a couple chips of GDDR5, right? Like, so, it makes sense that MSI didn't, like, you know, go insane on this like they did on the Vcore. It's just like, I kind of wish they had, right? Like, next to this Vcore VRM where it's like, okay, this could power a 290X and be okay. This right here is like, it's not 4 times bigger than necessary. Therefore, it's not big enough. Well, actually, no, this is like, this is more like 2 or 3 times more powerful than absolutely necessary. This isn't. This is probably actually like this is roughly a decent fit for what it has to power, but still, it is a two-phase, which is an upgrade over what you'd normally get. And the controller looks a bit more intelligent than what you'd normally get. So it should help with the memory overclocking, but my card does, like, I've messed around with my card a little bit, and I really think I'm just, like, limited by the LPDA memory chips. They just don't seem to go anywhere. So that kind of sucks, but hey, I can still throw better memory timings at them. So that's the memory VRM. For the VDDCI rail, which we have down here, we're looking at more of the same. So that's our low side, which is that PK632BA, and that's our high side down here, right? H and L. The controller for that, now this one's sort of your standard dumb, like 8-pin controller affair, single phase. That is just a GS7252. That's a GS Tech part. These have public data sheets. They're pretty easy to find. So that's kind of neat. Even though they're all labeled confidential for whatever reason, you can find them through Google. So not that confidential as far as I'm concerned. From the manufacturer's own website. So anyway, yeah, so we have a GS7252. And that runs at 200 kilohertz. Actually, so my notes do include that, which is a bit low, but I guess, you know, it takes a bit of the strain off of the terrible high side MOSFET. So, yeah, the VDDCI rail is a bit safer for it. It's kind of interesting that they also didn't include that capacitor over there. Probably, like the thing is just like, this card is like, if we cut this thing like right down the middle of the GPU core, actually, no, if we cut it like this, okay, so that, right? So that we have like an even number of memory chips on each side and even number of core on each side, because this is basically the most expensive part of the entire card. This half of the card is significantly more expensive than this half. Which makes sense because this is just like the minor rails, but it's just like, yeah, it's really imbalanced. Like, all of the attention is here, and then these are kind of afterthoughts. As far as I'm concerned, the memory VRM not quite so much as the VDDCI, but like the VDDCI was like, do we really need to? Right? Does this rail have to exist? Because on NVIDIA cards, you actually don't have a rail like that. But yeah. So that's what provides the juice for the memory controller. Yeah, we do have that. What's kind of neat for me as well, from a sort of like testing standpoint, is we do have, I think the VMEM has literally just this inductor to feed it, and the VDDCI has this inductor to feed it. So if I wanted to take power consumption measurements for the memory rail and the VDDCI rail on this card, it's really easy because you just desolder that, put a bit of wire there, and then you can measure how much power this is outputting, how much power this, how much power this is pulling in, and that should give you a pretty good idea of how much power the actual memory chips consume, because, you know, the efficiency of this, even if it's really bad, is at worst going to be like 85% or something, right? So, which is like, you know, being off by 15% is not like, it's not like I don't care about 15% off on memory. Okay, it's just like I want a rough idea. So that's kind of a neat thing. I don't really want to do it to a card this nice, but I don't think it's actually doable on the reference cards because I don't think they include the input filtering for their minor rails. So yeah, and this is input filter for half the Vcore. Then we have another input filter here. Interestingly enough, no, this isn't an input filter for 3.3 volts. I do believe that's the display drive rail, right? Yeah, that's the display drive over here, in this area. So that's actually, like, that is a rail that, at least on 7970s, helps with shifting around the cold bug on LN2, which tends to be around minus 110 to minus 120. So I've heard, well, actually, no, it's around 110, minus 100, but you can push it down a bit if you actually tweak that rail, because basically the display driver for something like that, like whatever that circuit is, whatever that converter is powering, has a tendency to just like freeze up if it gets too cold and you don't raise the voltage for it. So yeah, and it normally shows up as just like your display output randomly dropping out for no reason. So you'll just get a black screen instead of anything while the card is actually running. Like, it'll still be doing calculations, but there's just no output because for whatever reason that circuit just gets cold and stops working properly. At idle it actually works fine. It's not like under load it just starts falling out. So yeah. And this one might actually be necessary to mod because I don't think even the 290X Lightning didn't have control over that rail. And on the Lightning, like on the 290X especially, that rail is like critical because from like minus 70, I think the display drive stops working consistently. So yeah, that's something that, you know, is worth keeping in mind with these. And I didn't note it down. But yeah, the 270X Hawk, a really, really nice card, right? Like, especially the Vcore VRM. Like, I just love this Vcore VRM. This is great. I really wish we had more cards with this Vcore VRM. I know why we don't. Like, this is definitely not a cheap Vcore to build, but damn, is it good. So yeah, that's it. The R9 270X Hawk from MSI. So thanks to the guy, to the fan of the channel who sent one of these in. Because yeah, otherwise, I mean, I could have done a PCB breakdown anyway, but I probably would have ended up buying one of these shortly after like finishing my notes, because it's like, oh my god, this thing is amazing, right? Like, so much Vcore. So yeah, that's the thing, is just like, this is a, like, you know, if you're interested in overclocking 270Xs, which I think, like, they're really, like, they're pretty fun cards to mess with, because, well, the thing is, these days you can get 7970s for 30 quid, right? Like, 7970s have gotten really cheap. Like, you can get them for 30, 50 quid, and it's just like, well, I mean, you know, and the funny thing is the 270Xs aren't really that much cheaper, even though they are significantly slower. But I feel like the other thing to consider is just like, well, there's only so much you can do with 79s. Like, I feel like you'd just get bored if you just kept benching 7970s forever, right? Like, it's interesting to try some other chips just to see how they behave. So yeah, you know, as far as 270Xs go, like, if you want to get into benching those, this is definitely a card I would look out for if it's in working condition, because apparently some of these had a really high failure rate, but yeah, mine works, and I think, like, and you know, it's used, so it must have been working for a while. So yeah, but apparently some of them like, well, I'd assume you probably won't find any on eBay because they would have died like ages ago, the ones that were like dropping like flies. So yeah, and the other card, in my opinion, to look out for on the 270X is the Toxic Edition from Sapphire, but that one's probably going to be far more involved in terms of like modding or anything, because Sapphire isn't really, Like the Hawk is like this card is built for extreme overclockers. The Toxic, like Sapphire builds gaming cards. Like they literally don't have a commitment to extreme overclocking at all. They just happen to make cards that are really impressive every so often. So, yeah, that's kind of the thing. Anyway, yeah, that's it for the video. So thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. If you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I do have a Patreon. There's a link to that down in the description below. And I do also have Teespring where you can pick up things like AHOC shirts, stickers, posters, socks, hoodies. And I think that's everything. So yeah, and both Patreon and the Teespring merch, they help out immensely with running the channel. So yeah, if you'd like to support the channel directly, you can do that through those. And yeah, that's it for the video. So thanks for watching and goodbye.